Good morning. Yes, it's morning and the sun is shining onto my cosy corner. Well, this week, as I said last week, I'm going to tell you a story. And it's a story about when I did a parachute jump. Yes, I know what you're thinking. A parachute jump. Well, I was 39 at the time, so it's a long time since. And I'd been thinking about doing a parachute jump for quite a while, but was never able to pluck up the courage to do it. Well, most parachute clubs require a certificate from your doctor if you are 40 years old or more, saying that you are physically fit enough to complete the jump without having a heart attack or falling to pieces in the process. Well, with my history of bad back and dodgy knee, I didn't think my doctor would recommend it, so I thought I'd better get on with it. Well, I met a friend for a drink that night, and after several pints, the topic of a parachute jump cropped up into the conversation, and he said that he'd been thinking about it as well. So, fueled with alcoholic bravado, we decided that we would do it together on an I'll do it if you will arrangement. Oh well, that was it. There was no backing out now without considerable loss of face and being branded a chicken for the rest of your life. So I contacted the nearest parachute club and arranged for a jump 4 weeks into the future. But before jumping, we had to attend 3 weekend courses to get the necessary training. So off we went. And with a month to go to the actual jump, we were both pretty confident and in high spirits. But in the first week, we learned how to fold a parachute and pack it properly in its little bag so that it would hopefully unfold when the time came for it to do so. The instructors actually told us that it was very rare for a parachute not to deploy properly, but we would have a reserve parachute just in case it didn't. I'm not sure whether I found that reassuring or not. However, in the second week of training, we were instructed on the procedure for exiting the plane. Well, the main parachute is attached to the plane by something called a static line, which opens your parachute within about 2 seconds of jumping out. So you sit on the floor of the plane with your legs dangling out into space, and on the instructor's command of go, you either jump of your own accord or he shoves you out. At least that's what he said he would do. What a nice man. You're told not to look down at the ground 1,500 meters below, but it's almost impossible not to have a sneaky look. Anyway, you leave the aircraft in a spread-eagled position and begin a count of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, check. By which time your static line should have done its job and your parachute should be open. And the command of check reminds you to look up and check that everything is okay and it's not got tangled in the rigging or ripped. Well, if everything is okay, all you have to do is enjoy your descent. If everything isn't okay, you have 20 seconds in which to manually open your reserve parachute before you hit the ground at 200 kilometers per hour. However, we were reassured that if that unfortunate event did occur, we would have our course fees refunded. So that's nice. In the third week of training was all about the landing procedure. Now this is probably the most important part of the whole thing, as it is entirely your responsibility to get it right. There's no automatic landing equipment. So listen carefully. The two main requirements are to keep your knees firmly pressed together and turn your parachute into the breeze, if there is any. This slows your rate of descent and makes the landing easier. And as soon as your feet hit the ground, you absorb the shock with your knees and gently roll sideways. How easy could that be? Well, most of this landing practice was done by jumping off a table onto a sponge mat. And I can tell you for nothing that this is nothing like the real thing. Anyway, we managed to convince the instructors that we were fully prepared and ready. So let me tell you what actually happened. The day of the jump was bright and sunny, perfect conditions. We were both feeling a little bit nervous, but hey, onwards and upwards, and quite literally in this case. There were 8 of us in the jumping party, and we all piled into a little light aircraft, which was standing nearby with its engine running. My friend and I were the first in, and therefore would be the last out to jump. Well, the plane staggered up to 1,500 metres altitude, and jumping commenced. Because I was right at the back, I couldn't really see what was happening. But on each run over the landing zone, 2 people jump out, one after the other. And then the plane has to bank and turn and reposition itself over the landing zone. And by the time it came to my jump, I was feeling a little bit sick with all this motion. However, I thought I'll watch my friend go first. He sat on the edge of the plane, leapt, and I expected to see him gently float away from the plane and his parachute open and descend to the ground. No, he dropped like a brick. One minute he was there, and the next minute he wasn't there. It didn't do my confidence much good. Anyway, my turn came. I sat on the edge of the doorway, and I, despite advice, had a look down. Well, it didn't look all that high, actually. I could see cars, I could see people moving around, I could even hear their voices. And the silly thought even crossed my mind that even if neither of my parachutes opened, I might still make it. Oh well, I heard the command of go from my instructor and pushed off into the void in a screaming tangle of arms and legs. The spread eagle position and the shout of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, check were completely ignored. Fortunately, my static line did its job and my parachute opened successfully despite my adequacies. However, what they failed to tell you during the training was that before you jump out, fellas, check that you haven't got your personal tackle, your thingy, your what's it, you know what I mean. Check that you haven't got it trapped between the parachute harness and yourself. Well, I had. And when the parachute opened with a considerable jerk, I felt an excruciating pain in my nether regions. For a mad couple of moments, I even thought of releasing my harness holding my parachute on. But when I regained my sanity, I decided that separating myself from my parachute while still 1,000 metres up in the air was probably not a good idea. So I wriggled about a bit and eventually got things sorted out fairly comfortably. After that, I had time to look around and enjoy the descent. There was a target marked on the ground, and the idea was to either land in it or as near to it as possible. And by pulling on a couple of control lines, it was possible to steer the parachute. So for the next 2 minutes, I concentrated on positioning myself to land in the landing zone. Well, the ground was approaching pretty fast by now, so I pressed my feet together, turned into the wind, determined to make an absolutely perfect landing and atone for my terrible exit. And I did. I executed a perfect landing roll. Unfortunately, I was still 4 meters up in the air, and I landed smack on my bum. However, because I turned into the wind, my descent speed was not too bad, and I got away with being slightly winded. Had I had false teeth, I think I would have set a world record for false teeth ejection. However, after a few seconds, I got my breath back and I cautiously got to my feet. I wasn't absolutely certain I hadn't injured myself in some way, but everything seemed to be working okay. So I gathered up my parachute and stuffed it back into its little bag and looked around to see if I could see my friend. Well, I couldn't see him, but there was a parachute flapping in the breeze nearby, so I wandered over to have a look. And there was my friend, laid on his back, moaning softly to himself. I knew he was in trouble when he refused my offer to buy him a drink. But anyway, by this time a couple of instructors arrived. They must have been looking at our descent, with a stretcher, and we took him back to the airfield buildings. Well, the nearest hospital was only 2 miles away, so I suggested that I would take him there in my car rather than call an ambulance. Well, he could tentatively walk a few steps, but he couldn't bend. So consequently, he couldn't sit in the seat of the car. But by opening the sunroof, we were able to position him in the car without bending, with his head sticking out of the roof. Well, he was a little windswept by the time we arrived at the hospital. And a rather bemused nurse agreed that he really needed an X-ray and arranged for it to be done. Well, as it turned out, he'd compressed 2 vertebrae in his lower spine. He must have landed on his bum as well. And he spent the next 6 weeks in hospital. Well, I'm glad to say that he eventually did recover fully, and we got our celebratory drink in, albeit 6 weeks later. So, if you are ever contemplating doing a parachute jump, make sure you are well prepared and really want to do it. Don't do it as a drunken dare. But most importantly, check, fellas, that your personal equipment is safely tucked away before you leap. I like to try most things, and I'm glad I did it. But it was probably the most terrifying thing I've ever done in my life, and unless I have to, I will definitely not be doing it again. But you have to try these things, don't you? Anyway, hope you enjoyed that little story. And next week, I'm going to read a poem, not of my own writing, but a poem written by 2 fellows called Milton Haynes and Cuthbert Clarke, and it was written in about 1911. I won't tell you what it is. If you want to know, tune in. See you next week. Bye.